I think the Timothee Chalamet conversation can actually be very instructive and interesting for people who are learning about being a man, learning about masculinity, whether it is that they are men, whether it is that they wish to be men, in terms of boys wishing to be men, whether or not they have men in their lives that they are curious about with regards to their masculinity, all that stuff. And now that the smoke is starting to clear slightly on that controversy that he just ran into this past week, which we will talk about, I think this gives us a little bit of breathing room to talk about this on a wider scale. And I want to start with also the thumbnail that I made, because I don't know if this will stick as a thumbnail, but you see that I'm flanked by 2 pictures of Timothee Chalamet in this thumbnail with the caption, "Who's the real Timmy?" On the left, this is an image from I think 2018 or 2019 when he was wearing a backless shirt that obviously had this very effeminate look to it. And he was praised for that. That was a praised fashion move. And on the right is a shot from his music video for the Four Raws remix with SD Kid, the Liverpool rapper who some people thought was him. And in this shot, you see that he is wearing this North Face coat, and he's got the Marty Supreme look still going for him. And the question is, who's the real Timmy? But in a lot of ways, the answer is neither of them. I think that is what defines what a performative male really is. A lot of the term performative male has been overused. It's something I get thrown at a lot, so I understand the irony here. Like, people call me performative male all the time because I talk about like woke things or whatever and I have long hair. It's not a person with a little boo-boo on their pants. It's not a guy who's reading a bell hooks book like this in a cafe. It's not a person who drinks matcha. All this stuff, yes, can describe a type of performative male that people got really obsessed with making fun of. But in reality, the true definition of what a performative male is Timothee Chalamet right now. Not even just Timothee Chalamet a few years ago, in that era in which he was, we're saying now, apparently just like posing as this art boy and posing as sophisticated. I think right now is a perfect example of the type of performativity, the type of performative male that has become so normalized that we don't even see it as performative. And I'm going to talk about that by starting by talking about, wow, good grammar. So we should start by talking about this Marty Supreme press tour, but in particular, this thing that just happened, okay? He had this interview on Variety with Matthew McConaughey, because that's what they're doing now, the actors on actors stuff. And he makes this comment about ballet and opera. You've probably seen it, but if you haven't, here's the clip.
And I don't want to be working in ballet or opera or, things where it's like, hey, keep this thing alive, even though no one cares about this anymore. All respect to the ballet and opera people out there. I just lost 14 cents in viewership, but damn, I just took shots for no reason.
That's not a shot. I hear what you're saying. Yeah. So,
So this is the full clip, right? And people really, really hated this. Okay, let's just say it right now. People really, really hated this, and I want to talk about why. I think it's multiple things that have caused people to really hate those comments that I think are very valid. Particularly, I think it's the dunking on people from a different artistic profession. A lot of people have made this point, okay? A lot of people have made a lot of points. This is what the Instagram looks like right now if you type ballet. This is shit like this.
Like Barbie, like Oppenheimer, they're going to go see it and go out of their way to be loud and proud about it.
People still care about ballet and opera.
This has almost 400,000 likes. People are just going in, performers criticizing other artists / modalities of artistry is the biggest red flag. We don't do this, no, tacky and gross, which I think is a very fair critique, right? I do think that especially the comment that he makes saying, I just lost 14 cents in viewership, which he then immediately is like, oh, I'm taking shots for no reason. This type of comment is a kind of double down, right? Like it'd be one thing if you made the first comment and you were like, yeah, I just don't want to work in ballet and opera because those are kind of dead art forms. And then you recognize, okay, that's kind of mean. Like, it's nothing wrong with those people. There's nothing wrong with that art form. It's just, it doesn't connect with people at that large level anymore, whatever. But to say, oh, I've just lost 14 cents in viewership, that suggests, Timothy, that like what you care about is that social relevance and that popularity, and particularly like what kind of income that brings you, right? So that's not a good bit. And then like he just like scrambles to try to like joke it through, and it just doesn't quite work. And Matthew McConaughey is trying to save him as well. And I also think that one thing that probably pisses people off about this is the fact that this has been the accumulation of a lot of things with Timothée Chalamet. Everything, I think, started with the start of the big Marty Supreme press tour and the song with SD Kid, which people were like loving that when it came out. When he just, there was this whole thing with him looking like this rapper from Liverpool, and then he shows up and does a remix of the song that the rapper from Liverpool has, and it goes super viral, and people were like, oh, that's funny. But then it just seemed like he just kept doing more and more stuff to like put his foot in his mouth. This is also like kind of funny because it's something that he's said before in terms of ballet and opera. Like he constantly uses this kind of terminology.
I love acting. I love going to movies. I was kind of getting scared when I was younger that maybe it was becoming like opera or something, like an outdated art form or something.
And like, it's just shots, right? Why are we taking shots? I do think that if I was Timothée Chalamet, I would try to outwoke the wokers, okay? If I was trying to save myself in this situation, I would be like, well, look, these are Western artistic institutions that have long upheld concepts of white supremacy. People want to defend them so much because they're holding on to this Eurocentric view of what true artistry is, or whatever. I would say some shit like that. Like, there are some people who are making points also to the effect of like, yeah, ballet and opera are like expensive art forms to go see. They're not very accessible for most people. They are very rigorous art forms that are often very abusive to the performers, abusive to the workers, underpaying. And yeah, there is also a lot of racism still within ballet and opera that a lot of ballet and opera people might get overly defensive, denying. But like if the Nutcracker is still rocking in 2026, then like, yeah, there's critiques to be made there. But that's not what Timothée Chalamet was saying. If he wanted to say that, he didn't have the vocabulary, the knowledge to really say so. And like, again, after you're, doing this press tour where, okay, you've been dating Kylie Jenner since 2024, and then that's been something that people have dunked on you for because the Kardashians are one of the most exploitative families in Hollywood among all celebrities, and that's saying a lot, especially just in terms of what they produce. And then everybody knows what happens with people when they start dating Kardashians. I don't think that that's mean to say at this point, right? There was a clip also, I don't know if I should pull it up here. There's a clip of him talking about black culture. Yeah, here we go. In the wake also, as part of this press tour, wherein he has also really emphasized like kind of seeing himself in the Marty Supreme character, who is this extremely overly ambitious and grating person who kind of destroys a lot of aspects of his personal life in order to seek greatness at ping pong. Story that's been told a million times. We'll get into it. Part of it was also allowing himself to kind of delve into the hip hop sphere and the sports sphere that he has always had interest in, but didn't really come out as part of his public image up until recently. And then part of that was also addressing like, okay, so it seems like you're kind of performing blackness. And then he had this interview with the kid Mello and Kassim Famoyide where he kind of talks about this, and like he says something again that just like sounds wild and out of context, especially.
He's somebody I grew up listening to, and I just appreciated him, just getting the opportunity to do it, and I joke about the white boy of the year stuff and all that, but it's a fine line to walk. I want to be respectful and all the shit you're supposed to say, blah, blah, blah. But really, I'm just a fan,
And like, all the shit you're supposed to say, blah, blah, blah. And like, you can also see he's putting on an affect.
I'm a fan of black culture and hip hop and all of it. And how could you be, a child of American culture without being influenced by it? So it's a fine line between,
especially growing up in New York City, dog.
Yeah.
This is the birthplace of hip hop, the birthplace of that culture.
Super diverse.
And it's like, you're immersed in it.
That's what I've always said too. It's like when you're 10 years old or 12 years old, if I'm a Mello fan or if I'm a Soulja Boy fan or whatever, I'm like, he laughed. This put some respect on Soulja Boy's name.
Come on, about Timmy Tim, bro? Stop playing.
Soulja Boy about to be on your head now.
I just
you gotta think wherever he came up in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
His generation is.
And when he says he's a fan, like that is exactly true, right? He is clearly somebody who does love hip hop. I don't think anybody could really doubt that. Whether or not his love of hip hop is marred by, certain things he projects onto it, that's a separate conversation that partially would require a lot more diving into him that I don't think I could possibly do. I don't think I have the access to know what goes on in his brain at that level. But you can see why people would question, like, okay, now you're all of a sudden like wearing these big clothes, like sporting a bit more of a streetwear look, and then doing the rap stuff, talking about white boy of the year. This does feel a bit like insensitive or it feels a little bit appropriation-y. But like it makes the most sense when you put it into context of what is actually happening. I think this is actually the real point of why people are actually mad, and it goes to what I'm saying here. Timothée Chalamet is performing masculinity. He is performing masculinity and he is failing pretty miserably. And this is my thesis. This is what I'm going to discuss most today. This is why we titled the stream like this. This is why I introed like this. Timothée Chalamet through this movie is trying to signal at all the virtues that have in his upbringing been associated with adulated men. But because who he is at his core is kind of not perceived that way and probably never will, and because society is changing also in response to the rise of global fascism, in response to like trying to understand gender in a bigger way, and because he seems kind of desperate to bridge the gap toward that increasingly irrelevant North Star of masculinity, it all makes for kind of one big distasteful package. I don't think ultimately that when we look at these clips, we see somebody in Timothée Chalamet who is hateful necessarily, arrogant, probably, bad at speaking, definitely. I think he sometimes comes out quite articulate, but he has this frequent habit of talking himself into circles. But what is different about it is that in this case, especially with this clip with Matthew McConaughey, he's talking to another man. And so he's putting on more of an affect of masculinity to receive a type of masculine adulation, a type of masculine affirmation. Whereas when he slips up talking about something with Saoirse Ronan in this, talk with the British Film Institute from a year ago, it's not perceived the same way. This clip doesn't get a lot of pull. But I think it's actually really instructive because it shows exactly what happens with Timothy in these situations over and over again. So here's the clip.
I just wanted to get involved with Greta, and she was very persuasive.
He's talking about Greta Gerwig, the director of Barbie, the director of Lady Bird and of Little Women, which he was in.
There's a story I can't tell here. I apologize. But she was just incredibly persuasive, and
okay. Well, you've got to.
No. I mean, no.
You've got to clear that up a little
bit. She would know watching it. It was just. It
doesn't help.
It was.
She knows.
She does, but
she's great.
Totally,
she's great
it was PG. It was absolutely PG. But I don't know. I honestly didn't I didn't know where this conversation was gonna head. I haven't pre-planned any of this.
No.
Yeah.
I can tell.
Yeah, there we go.
This clip, he's talking also to a good friend in Saoirse Ronan, it seems, and he's trying to kind of make this in-joke where it just doesn't make sense that he would make an in-joke, right? Like, why would you say, oh, something happened and I can't tell you in this public forum, especially with these kind of connotations that go on in Hollywood. But because Saoirse's there, and because there is, this respect that he has for her as a woman or as a person, because there is this kind of cloak of oh, look at how good friends they are, and this is sort of the more feminine friendly Timothy, it's just taken as oh wow, he's kind of messing up on his words, right? And he says it. He says I didn't know where this was going. And when he made the mistake talking about opera and ballet, when he said that dumbass shit, he said also oh, I'm taking shots for no reason. If you watch his clips, he does this. He talks himself into trouble all the time. And I think that's not to excuse it, or that's not to say that there's not things we can pull, because there are things we can pull. But I think in this case, the reason why it is so grating and so infuriating when he's talking to Matthew McConaughey and then dunking on ballet and opera this time, right, as opposed to the multiple times he's done it before, it is because this time he is clearly performing masculinity in this way that makes him, first of all, position himself as somebody who's tougher and more mean, because he's this guy dunking on this, historically seen as effeminate art forms, especially right now, seen as effeminate art forms, right, that women like. And he's doing so with this kind of body language and this rhetoric that is more cutting, because that's part of the performance of the masculinity. I want to talk about what I don't think was the real issue here, because I do think in the wake of this, there's been this massive outburst of response. There's been a lot of critique of Timothy, but I do think some of it has been, I'm not going to say misguided, but I do think some of it is just not really authentically what the problem is. For one, I don't think people care this much about ballet or opera. I don't. A lot of people that are dunking on him, aside from the, sincere people who are yo, you're shitting on other artists or whatever, and the people who can read the kind kind of value systems that he's holding behind what he's saying. Aside from that, people who are talking about, the ballet is this beautiful form and how dare you dunk on something, or like, the Instagram video that I was showing you is a guy who's saying, it's a classy thing.
It's just that the tickets for ballet and opera are just mad expensive. And they are mad expensive because it's high art. So a lot of people still care about it. Tickets for the movies that Timothy is in are cheap compared to Porgy and Bess and Swan Lake.
And like, this isn't entirely false. I'm not trying to dunk on this person either. But like, it's high art. Like, it's ballet, it's opera, right? I think this is the kind of cloak that we sometimes use for institutions that make a specific type of art that's inaccessible and that has with it still like a lot of the ideology of like old Eurocentric shit, to be like, well, it's high art and you just don't understand it, right? And it's like, no, like somebody can dislike it. And a lot of people really don't care about ballet and opera. A lot of people, very few people I think, are going to be super motivated to actually become opera fans because Timothee Chalamet said this. Okay, so I don't think this is really about ballet and opera. And like I said, if Timothy had any guts, he would just be like, you guys don't actually care about ballet and opera. And plus, ballet and opera are problematic and da-da-da. And that would make it messy, and then he would be able to wiggle out of this a little bit easier. But I don't think anybody would take him seriously because nobody thinks that Timothee Chalamet is woke like that. Also, I don't think it's about how dumb he is. A lot of things are said now about how dumb he is and how dumb he sounds and how much he is ultimately a dumb boy at the end of the day. And you know what? That's not even necessarily untrue. I'm not going to lie. The problem that I have with that is that there's a lot of people that are dumb that y'all still like. Okay, there's a lot of people that have proven themselves to be not very sharp, and in fact, like if you listen to them talk, and I hate to use the language of like dumb or dumber, but like they can sound less intellectual than Timothee Chalamet when talking about certain things. So neither of them are, like for instance, like Tom Holland, right? Okay, so a lot of people really love Tom Holland. What we can talk about with Timothee Chalamet in terms of his lack of knowledge or intellect or whatever is like his lack of understanding of social issues. He really doesn't seem to get social issues, even though he's in, for instance, these feminist films. Like, I don't think he really has a lot of strong thoughts about like gender theory. I don't think he really understands racism on that level, or else he wouldn't be saying things like, all the stuff you're supposed to say, But also he was part of an SNL sketch that was talking about like the Palestine thing, like in a very kind of insensitive way, which I don't remember very clearly, but you can look it up. Look up Timothee Chalamet Hamas joke or whatever. That kind of underscores how Timothee Chalamet, for instance, has not said anything about Palestine, has not done anything about Palestine. Why? Because he's this shallow, mean person, sure. But like also Tom Holland hasn't said anything about Palestine, right? And like when you listen to Tom Holland talk about things, it's not even like he is commanding this much intellect when he talks about, for instance, like his experience in ballet. So like there's a particular clip that went super viral after Timothy said what he said, where Tom Holland in a previous interview had talked about what it was like to be a ballet dancer. And it's like, oh, see how he is like this more smart and more kind and, guy. He shows that guys can understand when it comes to the ballet. And he was a ballet dancer, so like he gets it. But like, look at what he says. Though,
I mean, it wasn't easy, but it also wasn't tough. Right. I went to a rugby school, so you can imagine like the one kid in the school that does ballet. There's going to be comments here and there. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world. There were kids that didn't understand why I was doing it or what I was doing it for. No matter how many times I explained, like I'm the only guy in a class of 30 girls in tights. I was like, guys, this is what you want to be doing.
Like, guys, like, can we just be honest here? Does that really sound like the kind of way that a person should talk about ballet? Like, as a ballet dancer, does that really, if you were a young woman who was a ballerina who danced with Tom Holland and he made those comments about, guys, this is really the cool thing. You're surrounded by all these girls in tights. You feel like that would make you comfortable working with him, right? If we were in this situation where Tom Holland was the one being dunked on, this clip would look a lot different. But because Timothee Chalamet is the one that we're dunking on, people are actually pulling this clip up as an example of like, oh, see, like this is what real men do. Real men are like this, right? And then they show his clip of him doing the umbrella thing because people show this clip every fucking 5 seconds. There's just like a lot of praise for this. And he is a really talented dancer, and he is a great ballet. And this is not to say like he's a raging misogynist either, but like this is what I'm saying. It's not the same treatment. It's not the same treatment. And like also the British thing, just really quickly. Do you guys remember when he said that there's no like American food culture? I'm tired of ordering a German burger with French fries and getting potato chips. It's exhausting, it's tough. And he would talk about like how American food is worse than British food. And it's like, this guy's not very smart. This guy is not like some raging intellectual. The difference is that, for one, Tom Holland comes off nicer. He holds more back. He does not have the same foot and mouth, diarrhea of the mouth disease that Timothée Chalamet has. But also the difference is Tom Holland is jacked, and Tom Holland is engaged to or potentially married to Zendaya. Tom Holland is, even though he is still kind of this soft boy and kind of young looking and short, Tom Holland fits the masculine stereotype better than Timothée Chalamet does. He performs masculinity more convincingly. And my last point on this too, like compared to, for instance, Michael B. Jordan. One of the things that has also gone out that I think is also one of the worst things that we've learned about Timothée Chalamet. One of the worst things that we've learned about Timothée Chalamet is that he is apparently cool with Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf goes on Twitter and like, you know, I guess this was in 2023, and he talks about how Timothée Chalamet hit him up and was like, I was blown away by your work the other night. Totally electric, totally present at every turn. I hope this is the beginning of your work on stage, not an anomaly, right? And Shia LaBeouf is like a notorious abuser, and like right now he is getting blown up for that again because he was acting out in public and being, you know, assaulting people again. This is not cool. Like being cool with abusive people. This is a classic thing about masculinity too, is that it makes you kind of close your eyes to this stuff and try to be like friendly on that level and not make discernment to be like, you know what, this guy's a piece of shit, I'm not going to talk to him. He just beat up a few women, it's fine. Now the thing about that though is that if we do a little bit of a search about other competitors with Timothée Chalamet for Best Actor awards that are compared very favorably to Timothée Chalamet, we would see that he's not the only person who fits this category. This was a year ago. Michael B. Jordan, proud of Jonathan Majors' resilience and would work again together after Majors' assault conviction. That's my boy. Okay, all he had to do was Michael be quiet. That's funny. Jonathan Majors has obviously kind of become recent news because he is working with Ben Shapiro, you know, a year after this, and is doing a film with Ben Shapiro that is supposed to be the anti-woke sinners or the non-woke sinners. So it's like, this is what you get, by the way, as a guy for defending people who are pieces of shit. They go on and then they fucking opportunistically essentially shit on your work, right? Michael B. Jordan is now, you know, in the running for Best Actor award for Sinners, which I think he probably deserves it, you know, for his performance in that film. But it's not like Michael B. Jordan is some paragon of virtue compared to Timothée Chalamet. Michael B. Jordan is also somebody who has publicly defended an abuser in a way that is actually more visible and more indefensible than Timothée Chalamet. The difference is that Michael B. Jordan performs masculinity better. And there's a lot of things there's a lot of baggage there because, by the way, you know, if you're performing masculinity, what do you go to? Black culture. What do you go to? Hip hop. You know, and Michael B. Jordan as a black man, especially one who's jacked and who's the sex symbol, obviously, you know, his masculinity doesn't get questioned like that, even though it probably does in other ways that we're not as privy to. But compared to somebody like Timothée Chalamet, he is so much more of a man. And so when Timothée Chalamet does things that are insensitive in public, it becomes this firestorm. It becomes this ritual through which all these people dunk on this little boy who is trying to act like a man. Whereas if Michael B. Jordan does something in public that is questionable, people will verily find ways to, even if they criticize him, still kind of feel comfortable with him as a person because ultimately he is more successfully being that man. Does that make sense? Even if you are somebody who is a feminist critic, there's just something more grating and annoying about somebody who is obviously trying to be a part of that boys' club versus somebody who is naturally in it, more naturally in it. Now, Sinners, I think, is a way better movie than One Battle After Another, and I've talked about that before. Whole other conversation. But when we talk about this is my point. It's not that Timothée Chalamet is the most detestable person of the lot when it comes to the Best Actor Award nominees. It's not that Timothée Chalamet is the worst person in the world. It's not that he's the dumbest person in the world, okay? He certainly isn't the coolest guy. He certainly isn't somebody who has, you know, a lot of intellect about social issues and is connected to what's going on with people right now. And he's certainly not the most intellectual guy or whatever. But compared to other men, the real difference is that Timothée Chalamet is not good at performing being a good man. And so that's what we're really going to talk about. 30 minutes in, we're really going to talk about something. I thought being French was on his appeal list. That's a tough one. Timothée Chalamet being French, that is kind of an extra problem with that. But like, you know, he's also French and skinny. Like, that's the thing. He's a wormy boy. It's like cosplay for him. Exactly. It's like cosplay for him, Corn. It looks like a guy who's cosplaying as this thing that he can't beat. When he's with men, he clearly makes this effort to stretch out his legs, to put bass in his voice, to cuss a little bit more. And while this can be seen as him being his true self, it's actually just striking me as another side of the same coin, right? When we talk about early Timothée Chalamet, we talk about one side of the coin. We talk about this feminist icon. Like, there was a lot of articles that were written at that time about how Timothée Chalamet is ushering a new era in for masculinity. This is from 2019, right? Look at this wormy boy, right? And then apparently he was with Lily Rose Depp. I don't remember this shit. I don't know tea like that. He's a matinee idol. While many other conventionally attractive actors have built a personal brand on their staunch masculinity over the years, beefing up to take on the role of the macho man, Chalamet has segued into a different state of being. In 2019, being soft is cooler than being a womanizing, hard-edged hero. Now, there's a lot to be said about, parasociality here and about like leaps being made about a person who, he had said like in 2020, like, I don't fuck with Trump or whatever, and had talked about how it's good that people get politically engaged. But he was never that political. He was never that woke. He was never somebody who was outwardly being feminist like that. Not to my recollection. But he was somebody who represented that. He fit that like a glove in terms of being that, masculine, in terms of being that soft masculine idol. This was not completely interpretation. I mean, the films that he was in, like we mentioned earlier with Greta Gerwig, were pretty ostensibly left-leaning or progressive, some would say, with their views on gender. Like Little Women. He's famously the guy in the scene where Florence Pugh's character is talking about marriage. He's famously in these films that are really interesting portrayals and stories of what it's like to be a woman and that are critical of social systems. And so it's not just that he appears, twinkish. It's the fact that he is also in league with this movement of young women actors and filmmakers in this way that casts him as like the supportive boy. He was in Call Me By Your Name, of course, right? As Danae says. That is a film that obviously was pro-LGBTQ in a lot of ways, or it was quite groundbreaking in terms of gay representation. And obviously he was quite good in that movie. The problem has also never been his acting, okay? I saw somebody make a comment comparing him to Taylor Swift and that they were both mediocre or whatever. He's not mediocre. He's a really good actor. He wasn't deceiving us into thinking he was a good actor. He was a good actor. And we weren't deceiving ourselves into thinking that he was somehow affiliated with these, positive gender ideas and these more progressive ideas. He was putting himself in those spaces, but he was always quite careful with how he engaged with it. In one respect, he would put himself in the backless shirt and the more effeminate presentation, but on the other, he wouldn't say anything that ostensibly challenging to any of these gender norms. And the reason is because of his ambition. This is something that I had talked about recently in another video. This is a video called The Curse of Being Ambitious that I have essentially dunked on before as part of talking about, in this new era of art, the kind of ambition that Timothée Chalamet embodies is actually not to be hailed. It's not a virtue. But this is who he has always been in terms of, I'm striving for greatness, right? And I'll show you this compilation again to that point.
17 years old, and as a very, very young artist, what I've learned is that the best thing you can do is just fail. Is to really just fall flat on your face.
This is good advice.
I know the classiest thing would be to downplay the effort that went into this role, but the truth is, I'm really in pursuit of greatness. I know people don't usually talk like that, but I want to be one of the greats. I'm inspired by the greats. I'm inspired by the greats here tonight. I'm as inspired by Daniel Day-Lewis, Marlon Brando, and Viola Davis as I am by Michael Jordan and Michael Phelps, and I want to be up there. I don't want to shy away from that pride. I know pride's like a deadly sin and all that, but I'm just so proud of the work I've been able to put in. I give 170% in everything I'm doing. No but there. I'm giving it my all.
So this is the kind of thing that we have hailed as like a paragon of how boys should conduct themselves in society. You should be ambitious. You should look up to people like Michael Jordan because they always wanted to be great and they pushed themselves and then they were great. Put aside the gambling, put aside the like verbal abuse of other people, put aside all the character defects and the Republicans buy shoes to the billionaire-ness. All of that doesn't matter because what matters is greatness, and greatness can't be disputed. And so what I think is really interesting too about that clip with him talking about opera and ballet, and Matthew McConaughey, who at some points has been like received as like critical in his gaze, right? People are like, oh, the look in Matthew's face tells it all. Matthew's eyes widen like, please don't continue down this road, right?
Or be like Oppenheimer, they're going to go see it and go out of their way and be loud and proud about it. And I don't want to be working in ballet or opera or, things where it's like...
He makes this face and people are like, oh, Matthew is all of us. But like Matthew McConaughey is somebody who, when you read between the lines, seems like a pretty conservative leaning guy. And if you saw the full clip, is literally telling Timothy, no, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. It's actually, which some people might say, oh, he's just saying that. But the reality is that what Matthew McConaughey represents is an idol for Timothée Chalamet, in the same category of the greats that he looks up to, right? And this is part of why he is putting his foot in his mouth and continuing to like valorize like certain ideas of greatness that, for instance, would lead him to avoid opera and ballet. Because yeah, if you're pursuing that idea of greatness, why be an opera singer? There's no socially accepted norm of greatness when you're doing an art form that a lot of people don't engage with. But this is what I think is really interesting, is that Matthew McConaughey has a fatherly role with Timothée Chalamet. He literally played Timothée Chalamet's father in Interstellar. A lot of people forget that Timothée Chalamet was in Interstellar, which is kind of funny because this is also kind of part of why that clip was significant. They were bringing those two actors together, right? Chalamet's constant talk of being one of the greats is one of a tortured boy who is trying to be a man in the way that Matthew McConaughey is seen to be. Part of the reason why it comes off that way is because of the fact that you can see the insecurity. You can see also when Timothy says he's a fan, like he's coming from the perspective of somebody who looks up to these things. And so of course, this is what he should try to pursue. But part of it is also, yeah, he doesn't have muscles, right? He's not chiseled. And so he's never going to fit that norm because it was never about like actual greatness, right? It's about an idea of greatness, one that is based in ideas of men who are dominant, ideas of, achieving at all costs, ideas of building success for institutions while being the face of them. That is what we've associated with greatness. Greatness is not to us, you distributed food for a lot of people in this neighborhood. You cooked for a lot of people in this neighborhood. You cooked for your family every day. Greatness was not to us growing up the idea that you were a really kind person, the idea that you helped conduct a lot of the clubs on campus. All that stuff was not seen as greatness in the same way. What was seen as greatness was, are you achieving in this institutional capitalist way, in this patriarchal way? And so this is also why it's just not working for Timothy, and in a way that he's probably really confused by, really frustrated by. Because he's just like, I'm doing the thing. And if I were Matthew McConaughey, especially like 10, 15 years ago, people would be eating this shit up and nothing that I would be saying is controversial. And he just doesn't realize that society has changed and he has also never fit the actual mold. He's never actually going to be that thing. It doesn't matter, right? Your mom is loving the commentary, so that's great. But I think his relationship with Matthew McConaughey is also really interesting because, yeah, Timothy was like 18, 19 doing Interstellar. And Matthew McConaughey is like one of the first interactions he has with a great actor, a leading man who he looks up to. And so he's this mentor and this idol, this hero figure, right? And their relationship manifests in interesting ways. So I'm going to pull up something for you guys. First and foremost, like, I did such a shitty job today. No pun intended, as you'll see. I did such a shitty job today of getting my tabs. So another thing that was revealed from this variety interaction between these two is that on the last day of filming, Timothée Chalamet went into his trailer and there was a huge turd in his toilet that Matthew McConaughey had left for him. All right, so a poop. Matthew McConaughey left a big poop for him. And this is supposed to be funny. This is supposed to be cool. This is, oh, you're inducted into the realm of the male actors, Timothy. You're one of us, right? It's hazing. And think about how that works, how hazing works for masculinity. Because that's just wild, okay? Nobody, I don't care who you are, you don't want somebody to just leave a stinky turd in your toilet. Nobody likes that, but men pretend to. Men pretend that, especially when one of their, idols does something gross to them, a gross prank to them, they pretend that they love it and it's a bonding moment. Because there is no other option for Timothée Chalamet in this situation. Timothée Chalamet can't say, hey, I didn't like that. Why would you do that? That's fucked up. Even though he is an adult man too, right? And technically should have the empowerment to do so. But if he does that, then whether or not Matthew McConaughey is direct or indirect about it, he's going to cut him off. And he's going to fail at that picture of masculinity that Timothée Chalamet is striving for. You're not going to be part of the boys club. Because the main thing about boys club is that you can't take offense to anything. This is how masculinity has always seemed to work. It encompasses the essence of masculine success and support in society. Men don't blow up the spot. They blow up a toilet, but they don't blow up the spot. Men don't set boundaries. For all the talk of like how strong and resilient men are, Men are never supposed to set boundaries. And if you talk to any, like all the men that you know in your life that fit, especially in this stereotypical masculine category, there's so much stuff that they let slide. There's so much stuff that they pretend they're really cool with. And there's so much stuff that's idiosyncratic, even when they're nice people, that they also champion or think is cool. Like Kobe Bryant abusing his teammates and Shaq pranking his teammates with poop. That's something we're supposed to laugh off, or we're supposed to say is like, oh, that's the complicatedness of them at worst. But you can't say, yo, that's fucked up. I don't like that they did that shit. Fuck them. Because that means you don't meet the boys club. You can't be in that boys club, right? It is like the opposite. Like Manhattan Project jokes like a safe space, but it's the opposite of a safe space. Masculinity, socially normal masculinity, is an unsafe space. Like, think about it. Would Matthew McConaughey do this if Timothee Chalamet was an openly gay man, an openly queer man? Probably not, because obviously that would come off a little bit differently. Well, why is that? Is it because straight men simply are too resilient to have boundaries, that they simply like poop more? Is that what it is? No, straight men like poop as much as gay men do, but the difference is that gay men stand up for themselves more, like typically. So there's a whole other conversation about misogyny with gay men, but it's much more known that a gay man will be like, fuck you, right? That's much more the thought. And also, what does that mean? Matthew McConaughey wouldn't leave that turd in the toilet of a young queer actor, because that young queer actor is never going to be Matthew McConaughey. Because part of being Matthew McConaughey is not just being straight, but being Matthew McConaughey straight, but being ideal straight man. And so that's not a club that the young queer actor will ever get into if he is publicly queer and if he behaves in a way that queers the gender relation. So this is what Timothée Chalamet is working with. And this is not like excusing him for saying dumb stuff or for, you know, other things we'll get into or we've gotten into, like the Shia LaBeouf stuff. It's not an excuse, but this is how boys become monsters. It's not some biological thing like some people on TikTok will suggest it is. I've seen people on TikTok say shit like, you know, I would never give birth to a boy. If I found out that I was giving birth to a boy, I would abort it because I don't want to have a boy. As if the problem is like who you came out as according to social definitions straight from the womb. As if it's something nascent and natural in masculinity. It's really not. It's a social construct that has taken on so many forms. And a lot of men will roll their eyes at such a suggestion because the very point is that it's supposed to be seen as natural. You're supposed to pretend like all this stuff is natural and normal, but it's not. It's socially normal to continue that system. Because men in, 2,000 years ago in the Abbasid Empire, was that historically accurate? Were very different than men now. Men in the Roman Empire, men from 500 years ago in the Ottoman Empire, very different norms. But the point is that men now, and that men in a patriarchal system do not have boundaries. They can't set boundaries because you are the dominator. You are the one for whom boundaries is not a concern. This is the backwards thinking. You perform strength and resilience so as to signal to your superiors that you don't need any boundaries and you can simply be pushed around. If I don't like drama, I just don't get into drama. I don't tell people that I hate drama. I don't emphasize and perform to people how much drama bothers me. I simply just don't find my way to it. Just the way that I don't find myself watching lacrosse because I don't really interest myself in lacrosse. But men constantly tell you that they're cool with stuff. Men constantly tell you that, that's nothing. Because it is something. And they're not cool with it. So they have to keep telling you that it's the opposite. Because the point is that they can never actually listen to that voice. They can never actually set those firm boundaries. To set a boundary as a man is to break the code. Folks talking like they King Henry. Oh my God. If Timothy, who goes on to play a gay teenager after Interstellar, right? Very famously, and becomes this feminist boy icon, who is this skinny, doe-eyed French boy, would have dared to tell McConaughey, I don't like that you did that. There's a good chance, especially in the slippery, two-faced way that social circles move in Hollywood, that McConaughey rejects Chalamet as a newbie into the industry and as a man. But instead we have the other thing, and here we are, where Chalamet's with Matthew McConaughey, and here's Timothée Chalamet, having his moment. This is my time to shine. I want to be one of the greats, right? This is the game. He's playing the game. Chalamet is also highly focused on how he's perceived, and that his perception is of an ambitious, hardworking, and masculine young man. And that also has to involve picking on other people. Because also, it's just partially like getting it out of your system after being picked on so much and accepting it and not setting boundaries that you go, I'll pick on other people then, so that you can even it out, so that you can feel okay with yourself because there's other people you can pick on, right? Not only is his making fun of opera and ballet this form of self-flattery by denigration of this womanly uncool world, it's also based on his disinterest and irrelevancy, which we touched on. Oh, I just lost 14 cents in viewership. It's an appeal to financial irrelevancy. This doesn't make a lot of money, so it's actually irrelevant, right? Caring about money, caring about viewership. This too is all in classic pursuance of masculinity. This is what guys associate with being a man. I'm the provider, right? In the basic home. I make a lot of money. I got money. That's the whole thing. Greatness is I got money. And if it's not I got money, it's other people get a lot of money because of my legacy. That's what greatness is. In the ancient Roman Empire, they used to have statues of the patriarch in the house because the patriarch represented the sacrifices made by this great person, this great forefather, so that we can have this big house that we have now in the Roman Empire. It's all the same patriarchy, right? There's still way many differences between what patriarchy was 300 years ago in a specific part of the world and what it is now, because it's fluid, because it's just an agreement. It's not an actual naturally occurring thing. It's a social thing that is constantly becoming, right? It's not just being, it's becoming constantly. But that's the thing. Chalamet is just following that. He's just doing that. And so then he's looking at other guys who have these things and who are praised for being ambitious toward these things and says, why is it a problem when I do it? And part of it is that the times have changed, I think. The times have changed. Somebody like Michael Jordan just wouldn't be Michael Jordan now. He would be, hey, that basketball player is really good and he's also a dick. It wouldn't be seen the same way when he says Republicans buy shoes too. But a lot of it is also the fact that Chalamet will not meet the masculine standard. Part of it is just like he probably never will, just because of who he has been, both in his head, because he'll have that, you know, trauma for how he was seen and like what kind of masculinity that didn't give him access to when he was wearing backlash shirts and when he was Call Me By Your Name boy. But part of it is also because, yeah, other people see him as that and they'll always see him as that. And especially now that he's now just like still looking a lot like himself, but just older and more weird in terms of, you know, trying to look more masculine and uncomfortably doing so. Like, people are just like, dog, you're not it. You're not it. This, and also his lyrics on the collaboration with SD Kid, the Four Raws song, about how he's trying to stack 100 million, his girl got $1 billion. You guys remember the lyrics from that? I don't know if anybody remembers the lyrics from that. It was more so of a vibe. But yeah, he's talking about how much money he's getting and how his girl, again, famous heir of the most exploitative family in Hollywood, or one of them, probably not the most, but one of them, Kylie Jenner, who's a billionaire, right? And he's flexing this. Why? Because that presents masculinity and dominance and virility. And when you want to present yourself as masculine and dominant and virile, I struggle with that word, virile, whose culture do you go to? Whose culture do you go to? Because it's not really contemporary French. It's going to be Black American. It's going to be Black, right? You go to Black culture for that. And that is, even though I think a lot of the love for hip-hop is probably genuine from him, I'm somebody who grew up in the same places that he did. I grew up with people like him. So believe me, when people are like, this is who he's always been, this is authentic to him, he loves hip-hop, he loves Black culture, I know. I was Timothee Chalamet. I'm like a year younger than him. I've been the skinny dude. I've been the boy trying to be a man. I love hip-hop as much as I dare anybody in this chat to try to act like they love hip-hop more than I do. I mean, I'm sure some of you might, but I think a lot of you will not, because I have been very invested in hip-hop for a very long time. But I would be fooling you if I were to say that my love of hip-hop was something, especially growing up, that wasn't concerned with my own masculinity. It wasn't concerned with this kind of racialized way in which we intake hip-hop as non-Black people. And I would be a fool to act like that doesn't make a difference in terms of how I discuss hip-hop nowadays and how I engage with hip-hop. Right? I can't just be willy-nilly throwing anything on and being like, this is hip-hop, I love it. I have to be respectful, and I have to be careful not to fall into those same racialized traps. But believe me when I understand, yeah, I do believe it. He's from New York, right? I'm from New York. I do believe it. He's an upper middle class skinny white kid. Yeah, a bunch of us were. He loves the Knicks. I love the Knicks, right? I mean, asterisk, but because we talked about men's sports in the last video, but I love the Knicks, right? So Chalamet's consumption and representation of Black culture has often been taken as appropriation, something that he clearly feels he has no time for. Oh, all that shit you're supposed to say. Whatever, bro. To me, it's just another side of the Billie Eilish coin. It's just another side of the Billie Eilish coin. A lot of you know what I'm talking about, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. Much ado is made about how authentic this is for someone like him. But what is it an authentic representation of? Why would a kid like Chalamet, who's this upper middle class French American kid who goes to an art school in New York City, whose family comes from, the ballet, is associated with the ballet heavily, why would he have such an affinity for this stuff other than its popularity? Why would he seek to perform it, to dress a certain way, to model his journey after athletes and rappers wanting to be the best? What does that mean about what he wants and why? It all points back to trying to be a man. It's the same conversation. He's this performative male. He's performing maleness. He's performing masculinity. And the thing about Timothee Chalamet is that he's 30. He's now 30. Listen, as somebody who's almost 30, I can tell you a lot of things happen in your psyche, okay? And especially for somebody like him, I can imagine that he's being perceived as this boy and he's a cishet white 30-year-old male. And that's probably really frustrating for him. It's probably really embarrassing. So it's very important to Timothy that we know he's a man and that he aspires to typical manhood. It's very important to Timothy that we see him this way. And that contextualizes another comment that he made recently. So recently he had this comment a few months ago where he says that child-free life is bleak, essentially bleak. The quote from this BuzzFeed quote, which is from another article, I love aggregation, says he made it abundantly clear that having children one day is something that's very important to him. Notably, he recalled a time that he and a friend were watching an interview with someone whose name he would definitely not reveal, bragging about not having kids and how much time it afforded them to do other stuff. By his own admission, this concept left Timothy and his friend completely perplexed. He remembered they turned to each other after watching and said, like, holy shit, oh my god, bleak. Interestingly, the writer of the profile noted that Timothy was understanding of the fact that some people can't have children or are never in a position to, but that he believes procreation is the reason we're here. Well, first of all, yeah, we're here because people have sex and give birth, sure. Timothee Chalamet is 30, and he is trying to be perceived as a man. And so for him, he's also thinking about having kids because that's what men do. Remember the patriarch in the Roman houses? Men have kids, they provide for the kids live on. And so even though it's super rude to look at people saying like, oh, like I don't have kids and it's great, it works for me. It's super rude to see that and say, that's bleak. Oh, that's bleak. It's fucked up, right? Who gives a shit? That's what they want to do. It's very reactionary. Let's say that. But it also just makes a lot of sense for Timothy to say that because that's masculine, right? That's performing masculinity. Oh, these guys don't want to have kids. That's not very manly. Am I right, guys? And men are very obsessed with legacy. That's how men are socialized. That's how cishet men are socialized. I want to have this legacy. I want to leave this legacy behind. It's very cringe. It's very, if you're talking to a guy, he talks about, I definitely need to have kids. I need to have kids. I have to leave a legacy behind. That's a red flag. That's a crimson red flag, okay? It's not up to you. It's not up to you to have kids because you can't have kids. It's not like if you're a cishet man, that's just not how your body works. Still, it's very much like inserting themselves as like having to make this decision and placing a lot of value in that. Even though beyond people just who can't have kids, a lot of people just shouldn't have kids because they don't want them, because they can't provide well for them. And they don't want to deal with that. So again, this is just another example of something that, like the Saoirse Ronan clip and like the opera comments, it's Timothy opening his big fat mouth, okay? It's Timothy having diarrhea of the mouth again. Diarrhea of the mouth is what I'm trying to say. I keep saying diarrhea of the mouth. Timothy's trying to express himself, and as soon as he does, he ends up saying something mean. He ends up saying something that's wrong-headed. And like, again, people do that. I do that sometimes, okay? I'm Mr. Talker, and sometimes I make comments every video that, looking back, I'm like I just had a situation with this most recent video about male athletes where I talked a little bit about figure skating, and people were a little bit critical because they were like, you were kind of rude about it, and I didn't think I was, and then I looked back, and I was like, yeah, I was being hyperbolic in a way that I don't think I really appreciated at the time. Like, my apologies to folks who are figure skating fans, because what I had meant to say was like, yeah, artistry is often devalued in figure skating, and it's often doing specific jumps and specific moves is like more scored, and then the emphasis is on scoring and on medaling and on placing, and so a lot of people aren't having fun. But I ended up saying something like, nobody has fun when they figure skate. When you watch figure skating, nobody's ever had fun. So yeah, like you say things, and then especially when there's a gendered component to it, it can come off like you're dunking on people you don't want to be dunking on. No need to apologize, Danae. But the thing is, every time it kind of lends back to Timothy also having this ideology that he's probably not even sure he has, and he doesn't really know how to reconcile, because I'm sure he does actually value a lot of what women have to say. He just can't recognize his own cognitive dissonance, and he's just deteriorating further and further into this person, into this shallow person, right? Into this patriarch. And he has to end up putting his foot in his mouth, and he has to end up doing really, saying bad things in the pursuit of that, because that's what it requires, especially for somebody who has so much to prove in that area. Does that make sense? Ms. Rose Deasy to you. I recently had to break up with one of those I need to leave my legacy type men who already has one child from a woman he's not and was never married to. Yuck. Like, your legacy is so irrelevant, bro. Live. Literally just be. Literally just exist. The idea, like, oh, people have to think of me a certain way. Like, that's literally you caring about how people see you. And then they say it like that, and they're like, you just don't understand. Well, we do understand. That's called patriarchy. That's called, if you're not constantly concerned with that, if you're not constantly concerned with being, the patriarchal ideal, other men exclude you. How many times have you heard a guy be like, yeah, I just started working out, I built muscle, and then men started treating me differently. People started treating me differently. And they act like it's, I got attraction from women. It's not. It's that men respect you more because you fit the ideal more. And when men respect each other, that respect is not real. It's actually an insecurity in themselves. Oh, I should associate with this person because he fits the ideal. All of these things are weird comments to make when you're the Little Women guy, when you've espoused the virtues of Greta Gerwig's work. But he always drapes his praise for women like Saoirse Ronan and Greta Gerwig as them being legends and being great at their craft, larger than life, right? There's a clip of him talking with Saoirse Ronan in one of those variety talks recently where he's like, Saoirse was a legend then and she's a legend now. Greta's one of the greats, right? So even when he's talking about these women, he has to code it in this language. And nobody's ever been like, yo, why are you doing that? But the thing is, his ideas are not there. And this is the problem with his artistry. He's a great actor. He's great at inserting himself into something. And I think that's partially because when he has to be himself, he realizes he doesn't feel comfortable engaging with those things in his real life. Does that make sense? This is very psychological and, armchair psychologist. But to me, it just comes off as like, this is the kind of person who isn't very sure of himself. This is the kind of person who is trying to fit this ideal, who is performing masculinity in this way that is quite tortured and uncomfortable and awkward to watch, because there's a lack of security there with himself, and there's a lack of being able to reconcile that with also the respect that he has for these women, or because is it real respect, and is any of this real? And this happens with actors and with artists a lot, where it's like they insert themselves so much into the art to avoid having to unpack these things in the rest of their lives. And that, that's everybody goes at their own pace, right? But it's just, I think it's a little bit frustrating when people say that, oh, we're being overly parasocial about this guy, dumb for assuming he actually cared about women's rights or whatever. Like, it's clear that there was a path here. You started your career as somebody who did women's films, who worked with women directors, who worked in these quite, gender progressive stuff, these gender progressive works. And that boosted your image and your reputation a ton. And then you took that to pivot into doing the masculinized stuff, from The King to the Bob Dylan thing to Marty Supreme, which it wouldn't be a problem in and of itself to do that work. But especially when you're now making comments about like, oh, being childless is bleak, and oh, all the shit you're supposed to say about black culture, and oh, like opera is irrelevant. It shows that what you've really cared about this whole time is your legacy. What you've really cared about this whole time is your greatness. And what's really messed up is that a lot of people don't think that's a problem. Especially men don't think that there's anything wrong with that. What else am I supposed to pursue? Happiness, bro. Like, yourself. Like, and understanding, wisdom, but a lot of people think that if they chase greatness, then they don't have to be a person. You don't have to actually be a person. You don't actually have to be happy. All you have to do is make sure that other people recognize you as great. Other people respect you as a great. And that's ironically also what stops a lot of people from greatness in and of itself, because one of the best things that you do when you do art is you immerse yourself into it, right? And you don't then worry about your vulnerability. But when you're worried about how you're perceived, you inherently are, encumbering your own vulnerability. And that kind of thing is very normal. All this is very normal for even just your average guy to go through these kinds of crises. And that's, again, not to be like, don't dunk on Timothée Chalamet, because the comments are dumb and he should be dunked on. And he is a performative male. But like, a lot of guys are performative males. A lot of the guys who call other guys performative males are the most performative males. And they're doing that because they've been told that they have to. And I think that you really get a sense of like how hard this has been for him in certain ways. Again, not to make excuses. But when you contextualize this anecdote that also came out like in 2018, early on, In 2018, he said that he wept when he realized that his role in Interstellar was so small and that he felt like a fraud. I had no career at this point, so I was the fraud a little bit in the room. And this is about his role in Interstellar, one of the biggest movies of the 2010s. He watched the film and he said he was in it for like only a few minutes, and then he went and he wept for an hour. He cried for an hour because he wasn't in it more, because he felt like a fraud. And it's like, how? How is that normal? How do we not pause at that? You're working with Christopher Nolan, who was the hottest director of the 2010s. You're working with Matthew McConaughey. You're in this massive film. This is a big look for you. This means you've achieved so much. Obviously, the role isn't very big. And he admitted later, he was like, yeah, I don't really know why. I thought the role would be bigger. I don't know why. I filmed the film. Like, the role was what it was. But it's because he has been going through this extremely neurotic process of trying to see himself as great for such an amount of time that he's not even fully conscious or aware of like what the thing is. You can't even enjoy this amazing moment in your career because you're so in that fucking space. It's like a dissociation, right? He strikes me as somebody who's probably pretty dissociated in the way that a lot of us are. And I just think that when we talk about this, it's where we have to get dark. In a similar way to how we did with the cat's eye video. Because why is it normal for a young boy who has so much available to him, even before he became a famous actor, why is it so normal for him to be this insecure? Why is it so normal for him to torture himself over some idea of greatness that is so socially mediated and is so unattainable? Why are these young men so miserable and these young people put in these miserable positions? And I think that's where we have to talk about exploitation. So we're going to talk about something that also came out recently. This is the last bit before we wrap up and talk a little bit about performativity in general. So in 2018, there was an email that has recently been released from the Epstein files, wherein Chalamet's publicist at the time, Peggy Siegel, talked about something that happened with Timothée Chalamet. Essentially, Timothée Chalamet was in a Woody Allen film. Another classic moment of working with an abuser, right? One of the most notorious, worst abusers in Hollywood, right? You can talk about that in a whole separate conversation. He did this film and he got backlash for it. Everybody who got associated with it got backlash for it. Because in 2017, 2016, it was like, okay, chill, no more. Stop working with this guy. And so what Timothy did that a lot of people applauded at the time was he said, I will not be taking any money for this film. I'm going to donate all of the proceeds that I receive from this film to charities for women and for abused women and stuff like that. And people were like, wow, that's really noble of him. That's a great way for him to own up to that. And this young man, doing that. What character, right? So that was a formation too of how he built this reputation for his integrity. In the Epstein files, Peggy Siegel, his publicist, says that he was forced into action. She says that he was sick about being forced into any action by the press. He could not go any place on his Call Me By Your Name Oscar campaign without the press hounding him about working with Woody. His agents made him give his money away, supposedly not as a sign of Woody's guilt, but in support of hysterical women in media. He's genuinely upset about the whole thing, and at 22 is a pawn in a bigger game. So a lot of people saw this and justifiably were like, what the hell? Like, this guy sucks. Like, the whole time he actually wasn't sincere about it. He actually felt he was forced into doing so. He was pissed. Again, justifiable to be mad at a 22-year-old guy for that, because especially in the wake of everything that's happened now, you see it as, oh, this guy was always performative about caring about women. But what I found really interesting is that nobody is talking about how Timothée Chalamet is in the Epstein files because his publicist was one of the most well-known collaborators with Jeffrey Epstein in terms of like linking up with him in Hollywood. And he was probably in his teen years when he started working with her and was 22 at this point, right? There was an article that came out at New York Magazine a few days ago about this same person, Peggy Siegel, who said her career was destroyed in 2019 when it was reported she'd been among the social guarantors who greased Jeffrey Epstein's return to elite circles after his first stint in jail. They remained in regular contact from April 2009 until April 2019, exchanging money and access until 3 months before Epstein was arrested for the final time on federal sex trafficking charges. Siegel is claiming very heavily, I had no idea what he was doing. I was just a business associate. I was a business associate of his, and I would link up with him and essentially return to these elite circles. That I would help him, link him up with these events. Epstein gave her $100,000 in 2017. In an email, she writes that she planned to spend $30,000 of it in a lavish party for herself in Southampton with 70 guests and a lunch overlooking the ocean. $15,000 will be donated to Elton John's AIDS Foundation, she writes, enabling me to attend a party at his house in June. I had no problem taking his money. He had lots of it, she said. She said that their dynamic, their relationship was transactional. But she was working with him months after he had already been in jail. And so that makes me wonder what Timothée Chalamet knew about that, especially given that he was very young and he was this boyish young man who had become this kind of boyish sex symbol, and how we know that a lot of people have had to deal with certain things in order to get into Hollywood. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm not trying to make any specific claims or allegations here, but I'm just surprised that more people didn't see that and more people weren't like, oh, was Timothée Chalamet trafficked? Was Timothée Chalamet groomed? Did Timothée Chalamet have to at least be around a lot of that shit happening? Which feels like yes, feels like probably he was hearing or being around things, right? Which anybody who's gone through any kind of childhood trauma and young adult trauma that is like constantly happening and you're just trying to make your life work around it knows that leads to dissociation, right? That's how a lot of us ended up dissociated for much less objectively unsavory things, right? Divorce will make you dissociate like that, right? So when we were just talking about Timothée Chalamet's dissociation and his understanding of himself and his understanding of gender, that has to come from some type of trauma, right? Because that's usually where dissociation comes from. For the average man, that's where a lot of this dissociation comes from, let alone for somebody who is talked about in the Epstein files, who had this publicist, who was a close associate, it seemed, of Jeffrey Epstein in some form or fashion, which she denies, but clearly there was something going on there. And then I thought about Call Me By Your Name, which he did when he was in his early 20s, late teens. I think he might have been 20 when he filmed that movie. And in that film, if you know what it's about, it portrays a 17-year-old boy, played by Chalamet, who has a love affair with a 23 or 24-year-old man. That's his first gay love, right? We are not going to get into the conversation about pederasty and gay male relationships and age gaps and stuff like that, because that's a whole other conversation. But what's interesting also about that, on top of how that became part of what made him the sex symbol, portraying this teenager who was groomed, right, is that his co-star was Armie Hammer. This is,
Timothée Chalamet,
him talking about his film with really Christiane Amanpour.
I mean, how did that happen? Was it the director? Did he throw you?
She's asking here about how did they build that love affair with each other in this relationship? How did they build that chemistry to pull off these very intense erotic scenes with each other, romantic scenes with each other?
Well, I mean, they say experience is the greatest teacher, and it was just about spending as much time with each other as possible in such a way. If we had 4 days with each other before we started filming, I know sometimes my instinct with other actors and these intimates.
So I'm just showing you that because as a precursor, if you don't know what we're about to say with Armie Hammer, buckle up, trigger warning. But this is also part of the job, building this very strong relationship and connection with your co-star, an older man who also fits like the same kind of archetype that somebody like a Matthew McConaughey might, to do these erotic scenes with him, right? It's very, very personal work. And so when Armie Hammer turns out to be Armie Hammer, we have allegations, several, about him being, pressuring partners into BDSM, and then verbal abuse, saying he wants to break my rib and barbecue and eat it. Then several other people making allegations about raping and physically abusing one person. And that essentially ended his career, right? The next year there was a docuseries called House of Hammer. So this is not me saying that Timothée Chalamet had an affair with Armie Hammer at all. But put yourself in the position where you're this young actor. This is a really important film for your career. And it involves you portraying a teenager in this quite, let's say, illegal dynamic with this older person who's played by this older actor. And that older actor you become very close with in order to portray this erotic relationship with. And it turns out that older actor is really into abuse and cannibalism. If that was the extent of it and I had no idea until those allegations came out later, I would be traumatized, frankly. Because, I've done school plays and shit. If I found out that one of the people I did the school plays with that I had like this really close relationship with and had this great, play with, and we had a romantic relationship for the play, not like in real life. And then I found out that they were into cannibalism, and sexual assault and rape, I would be like, huh? And there would be a lot there. Do you understand? There would be a lot there. A lot of unpacking, a lot of what did this mean when he said, a lot of, did I know? Could we have known? Could we have done something? Timothée Chalamet has never commented about it. It wouldn't benefit him to comment about it. But that's also pretty, just a general thing about Call Me By Your Name, all of that, probably very traumatizing for a young boy to experience. Because also being sexualized to that level, and being sexualized to that level because you're this effeminate, young, beautiful boy, that's not nothing, okay? And there's a good chance that he probably got through it in this healthy way. Not a very good chance, but you know, people do get through that, either just not understanding it completely and figuring it out later or whatever. But I don't think Timothée Chalamet had an easy experience doing that. And so now when Timothée Chalamet is wearing baggy clothes and like trying to really hammer home his masculinity to people and like being with Kylie Jenner and all this stuff, and when he's talking about greatness as this thing that he's so desperately in pursuit of, as something he was always in pursuit of, and he's now trying to champion it as a part of his image, I can't help but think that to some level that is connected to the fact that he was in this extremely exploitative environment, that he has experienced some significant dissociation because of that. I like that a lot of y'all are bringing up Bjorn Anderson in the chat. Very traumatic experience for Bjorn Anderson. If you know, you know. I won't get into it too much, but this was somebody who had a similar experience. Childish, boyish sex symbol with long hair, and who later on talked about was really fucked up. It was a really fucked up experience. I believe it was in the 70s. So Timothée Chalamet plays the Bjorn Anderson in our society in that moment. It's not a wonder to me that that guy, who also may or may not, but likely had some experience dealing with the stuff surrounding the Epstein files, would have heavy dissociation and would just be fully focused on, I'm going to act and I'm going to be a man, I'm going to be really cool and really great, and this is all worth it. There's some degree to which he'll have to feel the need to earn it in order to make this work, and to which he'll have to feel the need to perform masculinity in order to make this work. He has to hold on to those things. And quite frankly, this is an experience with a lot of young men. A lot of young men have had experiences with uncomfortable sexualization from a young age, whether it's direct abuse or whether it's just the way people talk, the way they are talked about by older women, all these things. And this is not like, oh, there's a woman behind people becoming misogynists. That's really not what I'm saying at all. Because a lot of this is men doing it to young boys. It's men who are already these problems and young boys who are pushed to look up to those young men. Young boys who are pushed to exploit themselves over and over again, clinging then to some type of position of dominance as the answer to that. Justin Bieber. And so this is just food for thought. At the end of the day, gender is performative. Gender is performative. This is the classic Judith Butler thing. We perform gender. Not as like some extravagant acting performance like Timothée Chalamet might do in a film, but as choices that we make over and over again to reassert that we fit this social idea of a man, of a woman. And we do so often unconsciously because we feel the need to reify that, because that's part of how we get our success. That's part of how we get our affirmation. It's part of how we survive, how we avoid danger, how we avoid harm. I'm a man. I look like a man. I look like I got my stuff together. I look like somebody not to mess with, so leave me alone. And so whether or not, whatever it is that happened with Timothée Chalamet that we'll never know, inside Hollywood, outside Hollywood, whatever, the next time that you see him acting like this, you don't have to like him. You don't have to pretend it's cool. As a matter of fact, it can be extra motivation for you to criticize him. But please keep in mind that this doesn't come from nowhere. He is doing a gender performance, the classic gender performance, the stereotypical performative male that most people refuse to acknowledge. It's not the Labubus, it's not the matcha. It's I am being a man. I am trying to be a man. I am showing you how much of a man I am so that I can be safe. Take that information or that idea for what you would like.